Welcome back. Xi Jinping has arrived at the Kremlin for his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. As per latest reports, today's meeting will be an informal one. It'll be a one-on-one before the official talks begin tomorrow, followed by a press briefing. Putin earlier said that Russia is open to negotiations with Ukraine and they would discuss China's peace initiative. Earlier, Beijing had offered proposals to end the war in Ukraine, to which the West had given a lukewarm response. This is Putin's first visit to the country since the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Western countries had already imposed several sanctions on Russia, and recently the International Criminal Court, the ICC, had issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. So how is Ukraine reacting to this visit? Well, Ukrainian government has urged China's Xi Jinping to use his trip to Russia to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesman Oleg Nikolenko said Xi's trip was being closely watched and told various news agencies that his country expected the Chinese leader to use his influence on Moscow to put an end to the aggressive war against Ukraine. But is that going to happen? What are the possibilities? Let me welcome here on the program Srikanth Kondapali, Dean of the School of International Studies and Professor in Chinese Studies, joining us here. Thank you very much, Mr. Kondapali. Thank you for giving us time here on Mirror Now. I want to ask you that prior to this, the Chinese president brokered a thaw between two historical rivals of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Do you believe the mediation between Russia and Ukraine is a priority on Xi's agenda as he visits President Putin?
Yes, definitely. I think he's going to spend 3 days from today on. This is a priority for China because there are very fundamental issues like European countries have a lot of suspicion of China now because of the Chinese position on the Russian actions on Ukraine, number one. Number two, with the United States, Biden administration had put conditions on China in the 4 summit meetings, virtual summit meetings, and in Bali. President Biden had asked China not to supply any arms to Russia in the light of the last 1 year military action. As you know, that there are a number of Russian casualties and Ukrainian casualties. In addition, Russia had announced a nationwide mobilization of recruitment of nearly 3 lakh youth.
Yes.
Secondly, they require a lot of equipment, and North Korea, Iran are supplying some. So they require equipment, and so China is the major military power. And so they are insisting China supply, but Biden had warned the Chinese not to supply anything.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the, so Europe and US are really against China, and China earns something like $1.5 trillion in surplus, trade surplus with these two. So with Russia, they have a $120 billion trade.
Right.
But with European Union, they have a $580 billion trade, and with US, $690 billion trade. So huge trade surpluses with these countries.
Right.
Very
yes.
intimate.
Yes, absolutely. So what is at stake for China is interesting, and what you explained to us is what is at stake as a trading partner. Now, there you are saying that, you know, one has to be circumspect on what to expect from Xi Jinping for Mr. Vladimir Putin, since you are saying that there is more to lose for China if they lose their trading relations with Europe and with the US. Now, he's the first leader to meet Vladimir Putin since the ICC warrant. So, you know, what is this then supposed to be? Is it then supposed to be merely a show of strength, a display of camaraderie, to create optics of combined forces, to send a message to the Western world?
The ICC charges are quite nominal. It doesn't really affect bigger states like Russia. I remember some time ago, there was an Italian court which had also given similar things to Hu Jintao at the time on war crimes and so on. And nothing really happened to Hu Jintao in that regard. So I do not really put much emphasis on this ICC charges, but nevertheless, this is an inflection point right now because it's more than a year that the Ukrainian situation is like this. It is reported that when the limitless partnership agreement between China and Russia was signed last February 4th, it was reported that Putin told Xi Jinping that he will finish the job in 3 days. He will finish the war in 3 days. However,
Yes.
we are more than a year now into the war, and so this is inflection point because there is a lot of talk about nuclear weapons. You may have also seen the recent, the Russian jets destroying the drones of the United States in Crimea, closer to Crimea.
Yes.
There is also the issues of escalation in Ukraine. The fighting has increased substantially. So we are at an inflection point where it is impacting on the economy, the economic growth rates of many countries. The energy prices are up, the fertilizers and fuel and the food prices. Inflation is very high in Russia, in Europe, in other countries. Even in China, the food prices have gone up. So for them, all these issues need to be addressed. And as Prime Minister Modi mentioned to President Putin in Samarkand meeting, that this is not the era of war, and we need to explore ways to find peace and stability.
Yes, which is what brings me to my next question on what is at stake for India, because we know that the stakes are always higher for developing nations when there are supply chain disruptions, when there are these kind of sanctions imposed on Russia. India at certain points happens to be in a precarious position, but at the moment, is it in India's best interest that the hostilities should end? And to that extent, this meeting is important for India as well, whether China really has a peace initiative which will be agreeable and acceptable to Russia.
For India, I think it is clearly stated that we require an immediate cessation of the hostilities in Ukraine and their neighborhood. But when it comes to China as a mediator, we still have a lot of doubts whether it is really neutral or whether it has something up its sleeve. For example, last week, the Chinese ministry had renamed Vladivostok and Khabarovsk in the Siberian region into Chinese names. Like they have changed several names in Arunachal Pradesh into Chinese names some 2 years ago. So this basically shows a lot of nationalism within China and not very conducive for any neutral mediation. Ukrainians, for example, complain that China never talked to them, while Prime Minister Modi spoke to Zelensky and President Putin.
Yes.
So we have been much more neutral and appealing to both sides, while China has something up its sleeve which is different and which may not be really good for India's national interests.
Yes, that's interesting and intriguing at the same time, whether there is a sinister plan, whether there is some insidious intent on the part of China. But a quick response on, China-Russia relationship. What also interests me is the fact that these two countries are not traditional allies. China and Russia are not formal allies, meaning they've not committed to defend each other with military support. But the two countries have, of course, developed close strategic partnership, and something, at least in terms of the rhetoric that has come, the two sides have been effusive about how they are great friends, and there have been statements made to that effect. Is much of it optics? And like you say, what really is up China's sleeve, we don't know.
Indeed, in June 2001, both the leaders at that time concluded a strategic cooperation partnership. Article 9 of that joint statement mentions about a semi-alliance kind of a scenario,
yes,
which of course they have not invoked so far on Crimea, on Donbass, or on other issues. So that indicates to some reluctance on the part of Russia to bring China in. While India and Russia have more good relations in the defense field, in the energy field, in space program, in many other areas. So the Russians are also holding back on China because we do not know what Russia's intentions are in this part of the world. So
Yes.
that is one concern.
Right. Professor Kondapali, thank you so much for joining me here on Nation Tonight and for sharing your views on the subject.
Thank you.
Pleasure.